The original Alien film, directed by Ridley Scott and written by Dan O'Bannon, was released in 1979. Although initial reviews were mixed, the movie was a commercial success and retained a strong fan base. It was followed by several direct sequels and prequels, with the upcoming Alien Romulus being the 7th film in the franchise. The first Predator film was released 8 years after Alien and 1 year after its sequel Aliens. The film bore absolutely no relation to Alien, except that they're both science fiction, both horror, I guess, and both distributed by 20th Century Fox. In Predator 2, there's a brief shot of what appears to be a xenomorph skull from Alien on the Predator's trophy wall. Although it was probably just an unserious Easter egg, this was the first explicit connection between the two franchises. In 1990, Dark Horse Comics released a crossover issue of their Aliens and Predator series, marking the first time that the two species came face to face, and establishing the title, Aliens vs. Predator. The first game of the franchise was released 3 years later, Alien vs. Predator, developed by Jarudan for the Super Nintendo, featuring an original story that's unrelated to the comics. Ideas for an Alien vs. Predator film were pitched as early as 1994, but nothing came of them. Except that one had a tie-in arcade game called Alien vs. Predator, developed by Capcom and released in 1994. And later that same year, Rebellion released a first-person shooter for the Atari Jaguar called Alien vs. Predator, though that was unrelated to the scrapped film idea. 5 years later, in 1999, Rebellion released the first-person shooter Aliens vs. Predator for PC. In 2004, 10 years after the original film idea failed to materialize, the movie Alien vs. Predator was released, written and directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. That movie had 2 promotional games, both called Alien vs. Predator, released on everyone's favorite mobile platform, J2ME. Following the Alien vs. Predator film and its sequel, Rebellion took their third stab at the franchise, releasing a first-person shooter called Aliens vs. Predator in 2010. And that's how we ended up with a comic line, a movie, and a whopping 7 different games, all called Alien vs. Predator. Now before we can get started, there's a lot of bookkeeping to get through. Just bear with me, okay? First, as per usual, I've got to issue my standard motion sickness, flashing light, and gore warnings. I try to err on the side of caution when it comes to that kind of stuff, cause, you know.
I'd rather have one and not need it, than need it and not have one.
Yeah, that. This time though, I really don't think it's just an abundance of caution. Some of these games are just on another level. If you are at all prone to motion sickness or sensitive to flashing lights, parts of this video are going to put you through your paces. And there is a tremendous amount of gore, dismemberment, blood, milk, glow juice, and so on. So much so, in fact, that one of these games was going to be effectively banned in Australia until the developers made an appeal to their ratings board. I'll leave it as a fun little game for you to guess which one. Second, the name. You probably noticed that some of these are called Alien vs. Predator, and others are called Aliens vs. Predator. I can give a pass to Alien and Aliens as different names, ditto for Predator and Predators, because it's clear that the S is actually significant in those movie titles. The pluralness is a key and meaningful distinction, but that's really not the case in AVP. The original comic line merged 2 existing lines, Aliens and Predator, so it makes sense from a branding point of view to call it Aliens vs. Predator, and I respect that. But otherwise, whether it's called Aliens vs. Predator or Alien vs. Predator is exactly as meaningful as whether or not they abbreviate versus or spell it out. Even after doing all this research, playing the games, watching the movie, and writing this script, I'm still only like 80% sure of which ones pluralize the word alien in their titles. Personally, I strongly prefer Alien vs. Predator, so that's what I'll be sticking with. For what it's worth, the AVP fan wiki seems to agree with me. And just one last thing before we get started properly. I had a lot more to say about some of these than others. This is probably the most imbalanced review I've done so far, just in terms of how much time I spend on each of the entries. But on top of that, there's stuff here that I just won't cover. Like the original comic series. Yes, it bears the name Aliens vs. Predator, but comics are way outside my wheelhouse, and comparing the comics to the movie and games sounds a lot like comparing apples to oranges. And really, the only reason I'm grouping the movie in with the games is because I think it's kind of an easy judgment call. Though I guess I'm giving the game away by saying that. Oops. But I also won't be talking about the 2 J2ME games, because I had a hard time finding any information about them at all. I I couldn't find working copies to play, but I did manage to find footage of the games, both recorded by the same person. Here's the first one, a platformer developed by Superscape. It doesn't really look like I'm missing much. And here's the second one, a fighting game developed by Wicked Witch. The graphics look a lot nicer, but yeah, I feel like the footage of these games kind of speaks for itself, right? I'm not sure I'd really have anything to add. But with all that out of the way, join me as I go through these 5 games and a movie, all called Alien vs. Predator. I'll highlight what makes each one notable and then determine which deserves to keep its name and which ones are getting new titles. Let's find out which one comes out on top, as there can be only one Alien vs. Predator. Alien vs. Predator is a side-scrolling beat-em-up game. You play as a predator fighting its way through a horde of aliens. We start off strong with a very catchy song over the intro cinematic. Actually, the music throughout the whole game is pretty good. But all of it is brief loops, so as nice as it sounds at first, it all gets old pretty fast. The gameplay is very straightforward. You can smack aliens, jump, and slide. If you walk into an alien, you can grab them and throw them. You can also charge up a cannon to shoot at them, and if you charge it all the way, you do a big area attack that also hurts you. I don't really understand why you'd ever want to do that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. 2 problems with the game become immediately obvious to me. The first is that I have a limited number of lives, and the second is that the aliens all take just too long to kill. Put those together, and I found that the best strategy was to just wrangle all the aliens onto the right side of the screen, and keep myself on the left side while firing the cannon until they all died. I'm pretty sure that at minimum charge, the cannon does as much damage as punching, but at maximum charge it does much, much more, and because the cannon pierces all the enemies that it hits, I think this is probably the fastest way to play the game too. But it still takes a while, and it isn't exactly fun. Aliens will only ever attack you 1 or 2 or 3 at a time, and because they all take so long to kill, the entire game is just a slog. The game is peppered with boss fights, which neatly fall into 2 categories. Bosses that are super easily cheesed, and bosses whose attacks are completely unblockable and undodgeable, so you're guaranteed to take a ton of damage, and the best strategy is to just stand on them and mash attack until they die. Both kinds of boss take a long, long time to kill. When you run out of lives, you have to restart the current stage, and I think that's it. Though one time I died, and when I pressed continue, it sent me back to the main menu, meaning I'd have to replay the entire game up to that point. Yikes. As was typical of the time, because of disk space restrictions, the game does not feature any kind of manual saving. Now that I'm in the future and I'm playing on an emulator, I have the benefit of dumping the entire emulated RAM onto the disk and loading it at will, which is trivial because the entirety of the console's RAM constitutes a measly 256 kilobytes. But if I were playing this legit, I'd have to beat the entire game in one sitting and do it within whatever number of continues you're allowed. So what to make of Alien vs. Predator? For the most part, the environments are very drab and not nice to look at all, except for the cliffside level. The boss fights are either extremely easy or extremely brutal, and either way there isn't really a strategy. The whole game feels like one long slog, shooting nondescript aliens over and over and over and over again until they finally go down, and the game offers absolutely no variety from beginning to end. Alien vs. Predator is a side-scrolling beat-em-up arcade game. You play as either a cyborg soldier or a predator as you fight against the alien horde. The game opens with a cutscene depicting the 2 cyborg soldiers gunning down loads and loads of aliens. The big guy with the ideal male body is none other than Dutch from the Predator movie, and the woman is an original character named Lin Kurosawa. They're joined by 2 predators, and they all decide to team up and start the beatdown. This game is almost poetic in its simplicity. You're just running around beating the tar out of the bad guys. They come at you in wave after wave, but they all go down so quickly that the game feels brisk and satisfying. In addition to the movement joystick, the game features a measly 3 different buttons: attack, shoot, and jump. But you can combine these in interesting ways, so you can jump kick and slide kick, or you can jump up and shoot your gun below you. Also, if you manage to walk into an enemy without getting attacked, you grab them by the throat and start beating the crap out of them, which is great. If you press any 2 actions at the same time, you can initiate a powerful area attack, which is so powerful that the game balances it by making it cost health to perform. And because this was an arcade game, and you continue by feeding it quarters, I guess that's an early example of a pay-to-win mechanic. Later on in the game, you learn that Weyland-Yutani is up to their old tricks again, and intentionally breeding the aliens in order to weaponize them. Then it becomes a beatdown of corporate soldiers and aliens. You can pick up and temporarily use the weapons that you find lying around, including the weapons that you knock out of enemy hands, but disarmed enemies will also scramble to pick up the discarded weapons, and that's a great touch. Layering on some more complexity is the variety of the playable characters. The 2 Predators play basically the same as each other, but Lynn and Dutch play very differently. Dutch is noticeably slower than everyone else, and he can only jump directly upwards. Instead of jumping to the side, he does a charging headbutt. His attacks tend to be slower, and his range attack recharges very quickly, but it's less powerful than the Predator's shoulder cannons. Lynn is fast and agile, and her attacks allow her to combo and bounce off of different enemies in a chain, and her gun lets her send a ton of bullets out, but she's completely immobile and defenseless while she reloads. All of them have a host of special moves in addition to the area attack, and they're actually pretty intuitive once you know about them. For example, moving down and then up and then attacking causes you to perform an upward spiking attack, sending enemies flying. When you grab enemies, in addition to just punching them repeatedly, you can also suplex them by jumping and attacking. And these attacks are slightly different between the characters. For example, Lynn can't even grab enemies unless both she and her target are in the air, and Dutch has the option to pile drive grabbed enemies for extra damage. The game is pretty short with only 7 stages, but it's paced quite nicely. I didn't keep track of how many quarters I needed to beat it. A couple bucks maybe? Some parts, particularly the boss fights, are clearly only there to kill you so that you cough up more change. But I guess that's just the nature of the beast. Being an arcade game, there's also co-op with up to 3 players at once. I don't think that actually has that much of an impact on the game itself, but having friends along for the ride makes anything better, right? So what to make of Alien vs. Predator? Well, it's great. The graphics are really nice to look at, the animations are superb, the gameplay is nestled in exactly the right spot between simplicity and nuance, and the game is long enough to provide a satisfying experience, but short enough to not outlast the simple pleasure of punching aliens in the face. Aliens vs. Predator is a first-person shooter in the corridor style of Wolfenstein 3D. You can play as either a Marine, Alien, or Predator. I started off as the Marine, as I figured that would be the most straightforward gameplay. It's probably worth talking about the controls right away. This is exclusively released for the Atari Jaguar, and the controller for that looks like this. If you're wondering how a shooter plays on this controller, the answer is badly. You can't strafe, you can only move forwards or backwards and then turn left or right. So when enemies come at you, you're just kind of running backwards and hoping you don't run up against a wall too soon while you awkwardly try to line up your aim. Much like in Wolfenstein, the level design here is just a gargantuan maze. You do get an auto map, which I kept enabled at all times, even though it's a bit of an eyesore, but the game tasks you with aimlessly running around to find security keycards to unlock the doors to previously inaccessible areas. Even with the auto map, you're probably not going to remember exactly where each door is for every given security level, making the already laborious gameplay very tedious. So I didn't play for long. Next up, I gave the Predator a try. This time around, additional weapons are granted by performing honorable kills, and your score is reduced by dishonorable kills. I have no idea what that means. It took me a while to figure out that stealth is O for option and not 0, but it doesn't really matter because this is fundamentally the same game as the Marines, just now instead of a shotgun with very generous hit detection, you have wrist blades with extremely fickle hit detection. Last I played the Alien. The moment the game began, I was under fire from Marines who were off screen. My only attacks are melee, and they have the same finicky hit detection as the Predator's wrist blades. I died almost instantly. So what to make of Alien vs. Predator? Well, it's definitely a product of its time. All this game offers is a samey, arbitrary maze filled with the same bland enemy or two copy-pasted dozens of times. Normally, I would have tried to play more despite my misgivings, but I really don't think there's anything here in terms of a payoff, and the gameplay across the 3 different species is almost identical. It's just a matter of how much you want to put up with the extremely janky melee. So if wandering around in a maze ad nauseum isn't your idea of fun, then I don't think there's anything this game really has to offer you. Aliens vs. Predator is a first-person, mostly shooter, where you'll be playing either a colonial marine, alien, or predator. And just because it's completely unavoidable, I'll go ahead and mention it up front. This is easily going to be the roughest footage to watch. As the alien, not only are you subjected to an extremely wide-angle fisheye lens, but you also move fairly quickly and freely crawl from floor to wall to ceiling, which can be tremendously disorienting to play and pretty nauseating to watch. On top of that, regardless of the species, you'll have to deal with some pretty significant head tilting, and the lighting in the levels tends to be pretty harsh. While there are sporadic areas of jarring brightness, most of the game is plunged into darkness, and you aren't really given much to deal with it. As the alien, you get a sort of low-light vision, which the game calls navigation mode, which allows you to see regardless of light level, but dramatically reduces the range of your vision. As the Marine, you get the so-called image intensifier, which is probably the most abrasive night vision I've ever seen in a game, with even dim lights totally blowing out into complete white, making it borderline unusable. You do thankfully get some flares, but you can only toss a few of them out before hitting a cooldown, and well, you have to toss them out, meaning you probably won't be doing that in the heat of the moment when you need to be shooting at aliens. The Predator gets 4 different vision modes: normal vision, blue-colored heat vision for seeing humans, red-colored vision that highlights aliens, and a green-colored vision that highlights other predators. Probably the biggest advantage of using a species-specific vision mode is actually just how much it softens the harsh environmental lighting. So other than the distortion effect of switching between these visions, and the fact that you have to cycle through them instead of being able to select the one you want at will, the Predator is the species that's probably easiest on the eyes to play or watch. Well, so long as you don't mind seeing everything in either blue or red. Anyway, the game offers 1 campaign per species, and you can play them in any order, so I just defaulted to the order they were listed in the menu. Alien, then Marine, then Predator. Incidentally, I do think that's probably the best order to play them in, but I'll get back to that. For now, let's get xenomorphing. Okay, so I load into the level, crawl out of a tube, and then, then what? Where am I supposed to go? I know I can climb walls. How do I do it? This has got to be some kind of record for me. I'm not 10 seconds into the game, and I am stumped. Okay, the manual says I can crawl up walls while crouching. I probably would have figured that out before too long. Even still, I think it's worth pointing something out about this level design here. All of the lighting in this room suggests that the thing that I should be paying the most attention to is the tunnel that I just came out of, whereas the place that I'm actually supposed to go to progress is completely dark. So some of the most basic visual cues that can be used to direct players are already being put to ill use. Anyway, I crawl out of my spawn hole, and I start scampering around. Oh no. Yeah, this very first area is already a bit of a maze, and it's a maze where I'm expected to crawl around on the walls and ceiling, and ways forward are not going to be indicated with lighting or anything. Oh jeez. So, not even 5 minutes in, and the game has already stumped me twice. I figured out that I can claw open some vents. I mean, I've played enough games to know that one. But all I've managed to do is crawl around in circles, and I have absolutely no idea where I'm supposed to go next. I've tried slapping some other stuff, basically at random, but it didn't do anything. Now, I do have to kind of take some blame here. Kind of. When entering this room, the game did explicitly tell me to block the fuel pipes, but I missed that message. These update messages are kinda small at 1080p, and they disappear fast. And I figured that if you missed them, then you just missed them. Only after playing did I realize that you can press F1 to view the message history. I didn't think to try that for some reason. Ah well, at this point I decided to look up a guide. I really didn't want to, but I was truly stumped. Okay, so my intuition was half right. I should have been slapping these things, but I have to specifically slap this part even though there isn't any obvious indication that that would be the case. Now that these things have gone down, the fire is cut off, and I can continue through the level. Here, I encounter my first hostiles. I drop a save and discover that this game enforces a hard limit on how many times you can save per level. Okay. Well, now that I've read the manual, I've decided to follow its advice and try to take these humans on with a bit of stealth, but quickly determine that that isn't really going to work. Even when I'm pretty high on the wall and in total darkness, humans have a tendency of noticing me and attacking, so I switch tactics to just pure speed. That turns out to be extremely effective because the aliens' instant light attacks are enough to one-shot the weak humans, so I'm able to put them down nice and fast. The big downside is that some of the humans are using incendiary grenades, and they go off even when the user dies. That's no good. And there really is no way to prevent that detonation. Look, this person already has their Molotov lit and ready to go from the moment that they're done using the toilet. Given that your only means of murder are melee range, killing someone who bursts into flames is a pretty big risk. When you catch fire, you stay on fire for a good long while, and the damage you receive can be devastating. I mean, it's not actually that hard at all to bait a grenade throw, and they only ever carry one, but it's basically impossible to distinguish the people carrying fire grenades from everybody else. Even worse than the fire grenade people are the flamethrower marines, who can turn on a dime to light you up and cook you in an instant. It doesn't even matter that they die. If you die, you gotta load up your save. Yeah, I think I see what's going on here. See, the whole game is peppered with these moments that are really easy to deal with when you know that they're coming, but if you don't know they're coming, they're basically guaranteed to instantly kill you. Taken together with the limited number of saves, it's pretty clear that these are intended to just tediously drag out the game's time, punishing you for not saving recently by making you replay up to that moment, but then also punishing you for saving too frequently by limiting you on saves. On easy, you get 9 saves, on normal, which is what I played, you only get 4, and on hard, you get a measly 2. And these levels are not at all that brief, so you'd really have to stretch those 2 saves for all they're worth. On the Super Nintendo game, there was no saving due to hardware restrictions, and for the arcade game, difficulty gates like this made financial sense. Make the player pop more quarters in, turn a bigger profit. Even if that isn't a good reason, it's still a reason. In a game like this, though, this is just tedious for no reason at all. Luckily, there's a cheat for unlimited saves. Combine that with quick save and quick load binds, and we've got ourselves a much more enjoyable game. Anyway, I learned my lesson real fast about stealth, which is to say, there isn't any. You definitely can creep around slowly and break lights to conceal yourself in shadow, but you can't really sneak attack enemies, and there are lots of sections of the game that take place in tunnels, vents, and corridors where you have absolutely no choice but to run directly at your foes. Which is fine, actually, because that's the best way to deal with them anyway. This game wants you to be something of a speeding rocket made out of razor blades, eviscerating everything around you while you relentlessly push forward at supersonic speeds, barely taking the time to even process the environment around you. Progressing through the levels as an alien invariably requires you to basically just break shit at random until you happen to destroy the thing that you were supposed to be breaking. Remember how I got stumped in literally the very first area of the entire game because I didn't realize that I was supposed to break these particular things? Well, guess how long it took for me to get stuck again? If you guessed literally the very next area, you got it. I get that I'm supposed to access the labs because Monitor Man said I wasn't allowed in there, and I guess aliens understand English, and my entire motivation here is just pure spite. And I can see that there are these 2 nearly identical side areas, but after killing the humans and destroying the turrets, I have absolutely no idea what I'm supposed to do next to gain access to those aforementioned labs. Upon consulting the walkthrough, I learned that I'm supposed to destroy these panels specifically. Not that there's any reason to suspect that that's what lets you progress. I don't even think there was a hint this time. You're just supposed to know that. Okay, I get into the labs, kill some androids, and oh, when I bash these pipes, they blow out some steam. Hey, I don't need a guide for this one, even though that was just sheer luck. Break all the pipes, and the Marines reactivate the elevator to send up reinforcements, and that lets me continue through the level. The whole Alien campaign is like this. Running from room to room at breakneck speeds, annihilating man and machine alike. There were several times where I'd just be frantically zipping around an enclosed space, swiping my claws wildly in the hopes that I'd end up breaking whatever it is that I actually needed to progress to the next area. And during this aimless frenzy, you better believe that Marines respawn infinitely to come to try to kill you. They're very aggressive about it. The game's not even trying to conceal the infinite spawns. The only way to recover your health to withstand the endless onslaught is to bite people's heads off, but it's a really finicky move. The exact spot to line up people's heads to even trigger the head bite is really fickle, and oftentimes the slightest adjustment after the jaws appear will have you fruitlessly chop people's heads off instead of eating them, which denies you the opportunity to heal. Similarly, killing someone without chopping their head off is just generally kind of difficult. In case it wasn't already clear, the cause and effect of what you need to break is not always obvious. I don't really know why breaking the pipes in the labs was enough to make the Marines send up a team to try to kill me, or why those panels were the key to unlocking the labs in the first place. By the time I got to this level, I was already just breaking anything and everything that I could get my sickly silicon scrappers on, so I naturally broke every monitor in the mother room aboard the ship, and that, for some reason, triggered the ship's self-destruct, which was, for some reason, exactly what I wanted to do. Yeah, the aliens' motivation is also a bit odd. Admittedly, I haven't seen every single Alien movie, but I kinda thought the whole point of the xenomorphs was that they were purely instinctual but clever animals. But the very first level tasks us with sealing a temple, which feels like a weirdly cultural objective for an animal to have, and subsequent missions have us going on rampages that don't really make sense, and enacting plans that are elaborate almost to the point of silliness, like triggering a ship's self-destruct to prompt the humans to launch an escape craft, which we hitch a ride on so that we can go and ravage Earth. Also, for a game called Aliens vs. Predator, the Alien campaign doesn't feature very much versus Predator. Exactly 2 Predators show up, and only at the very, very end, and I'm pretty sure you don't even have to kill them, though I'm not certain about that. I mean, I killed them. Once you've completed a campaign, you unlock bonus missions according to the difficulty that you beat it on. In order to get them all, you need to beat the campaigns on hard, which I didn't do, even though I actually don't think it would have been all that much harder compared to normal as long as you have unlimited saves. The bonus levels are actually levels from the other campaigns played backwards, which is a neat idea and a good way to recycle the level design, but that also meant I wasn't super interested in playing them, in the same way that I wasn't really interested in playing through all the campaigns again on a harder difficulty. Next up, the Marine campaign. This game wastes absolutely no time and is probably the most abrupt in the middle of things intro I've ever seen.
Warning, intruder alert. All personnel must evacuate.
Wake up, Private, you're in some serious shit. We're bugging out now. Level 3 doors are already locked, so get your ass to the comms room and I'll brief you from there.
Yeah, okay, let's talk about the FMV. The acting in this game ranges from so-so to kind of awful.
All units, report casualties. Repeat, all units, report casualties now. How bad are those casualties, people?
I feel kind of bad for even saying it though, because it seems that they're really putting their heart into it. Actually, the original game had professional actors who I'd say did a much better job.
Welcome to the main colony base, Marine. Looks like the colonists shit a brick and pulled out.
But when they re-released the game for the Gold Edition, they swapped out the original FMV with recordings done by the development team.
We as a team didn't feel like they kind of captured the urgency we were looking for. They were quite sort of performed as if they were, a man behind a desk who was being quite separate from the action. For the Gold Edition, we actually created versions ourselves. I think you'll find probably quite a healthy debate online about the quality of the acting.
I kind of agree that the original performances are maybe too laid back, but I also think most of them still work better than the replacements. Probably the best of the new bunch is in the Predator campaign. I'm not really sure if it's what he was actually trying to go for, but this guy absolutely nails the vibe of an incompetent officer who maybe only has his job because his daddy is an important man, and he's in way over his head, desperately trying to assert his authority in a situation where deep down, he knows he's completely fucked.
All doors have been secured. Stay on maximum alert. This thing must be stopped now!
The Marine campaign is where the game's cracks really start to show for me. For one thing, the Marine constantly runs at Olympic sprinting speed. I'm only barely slower than the aliens. This means that you spend the entire game sprinting around, strafing, and mowing down the incoming aliens, who are barely even a threat. You're never hunkering down, taking cover, tiptoeing along. It's always go, go, go. This kind of calls into question why the motion tracker is even in the game, other than how iconic it is. You and the aliens are always running so fast that it doesn't even have the opportunity to be useful. On top of that, when you blow an alien into chunks, which you'll be doing quite often, each individual chunk tracks on your motion scanner until they fade out of existence, even though they aren't even moving, making the scanner even more unhelpful. Speaking of which, blowing aliens into chunks is great. Dismembering humans as the alien was also pretty good. Unfortunately, bodies disappear very, very fast, which is doubly annoying as an alien trying to pick heads off of corpses. By far, the biggest danger to the Marine is running out of bullets. Okay, that and the facehuggers, which kill you instantly in order to coax more precious saves out of you. The alien spawn rate is absolutely ludicrous, and you spend the entire game constantly swarmed by them. They're so relentless that if you sit around and listen to the opening brief in some of these missions, you'll end up getting mobbed by them and killed. To me, this is the big problem with the game. It was already starting to show in the Alien campaign, but it is impossible to ignore as the Marine. This game is extremely frantic, but not in a desperately fighting for your life kind of way, more in a there's a lot of stuff going on all the time and I'm never sure what I should do next and everything is moving extremely quickly kind of way. It's not just the frequently obtuse level design or MacGuffin hunting, it's the core of the game, down to the speed at which everyone moves and the relentlessly respawning hordes. There is absolutely no pacing to this game at all. Right from the very instant that the campaign begins, you're in the middle of things, aliens are everywhere, and you're flying like a bat out of hell through the level. While the Alien campaign was all about finding the correct arbitrary thing to break in order to progress, the Human campaign is instead all about finding the correct arbitrary thing to use in order to progress. Usually it was just a matter of scrambling from room to room, spamming the interact button on every possible thing that looked interactable, pressing buttons, throwing levers, turning valves, you name it. But there were parts that were more than a little rough. By far the most painful, puzzle of the whole game is in this level where you have to run around a big labyrinth of a facility, turning valves to disable 5 different fans. I disabled 3 of them, no problem, and then spent several minutes frantically searching for the final valves to no avail. I went back to my handy-dandy walkthrough, and it described a beam with flashing lights on the roof at a staircase. Okay, well, despite running around everywhere, that wasn't really ringing any bells, but I did know where some staircases were, and oh, you have got to be fucking kidding me. How on earth was I supposed to know to shoot that? It doesn't look like it would create a bridge, and even if it did, it doesn't even look like that bridge goes anywhere. The game offers absolutely no way for you to know that this is the correct path to take. For the most part, you're likely to cover every inch of ground in a level simply because you're required to hunt down switches and buttons and levers to progress, and there's absolutely no way of knowing where those are. But there are some levels where certain sections clearly just exist to be explored, even though the game offers absolutely no reason to actually go through and explore them. Wasting time on a level means more aliens spawn, meaning you burn through more bullets, and you only have a finite number of those on any given level. So even if you are exploring specifically to find new weapons or ammunition, that's probably going to end up being a losing prospect. Although by far the most common foe you'll be facing as a Marine are the aliens, some other enemies show up too. A couple of predators make a little cameo, though I am quite sure that you can ignore them. I killed one of them, but that took so much ammunition and time that I decided to just zip past the second one. It's kind of funny how you can just push them around by running into them. On that same level, you're also introduced to Weyland-Yutani's new defense system, which are these Xenoborgs, I think. It's kind of hard to follow what little story there is because, you get ambushed for listening to it. It's not really clear to me how the Xenoborgs are in any way a good defense system, given how slow they are to acquire targets. And while they do look like they're part Xenomorph, they're completely stationary, so I don't even know what the Xenomorph bits are doing. The second to last level of the Marine campaign throws such an onslaught at you that it makes the rest of the campaign up to that point seem like a pleasant stroll. Wave upon wave upon wave of aliens descend upon you, with a healthy serving of the far more durable and damaging Praetorian Xenomorphs. These guys are as dangerous to fight as they are tedious. This all leads up to an obvious boss fight arena where you're randomly betrayed, I think, and the Corp sicks a Predalien on you. I didn't really get to see what its whole deal was before it was unceremoniously gunned down by the sentry guns that I had activated earlier. Oh well. The final Marine level has you facing off against the Alien Queen. This entire level only exists to be an homage to the end of Aliens. Having seen that movie, and with a dash of plain luck, I managed to figure out what to do pretty fast. I ended up kiting the Queen into the airlock in the floor where she got completely stuck, so I was able to explore the rest of the arena in complete safety. From there, I found the way to open the second airlock door, and I just kind of figured that this little hidey hole was going to keep me safe, and sure enough, it did. But after waiting and waiting and waiting, the entire cabin depressurized and everything got sucked out into space, but the mission didn't end. So I guess I softlocked by having the Queen fall into the airlock before opening the second door. Not a problem. I restarted the level, and now that I know exactly what to do and where to go, I finished the whole thing in well under a minute. And now, finally, the Predator campaign. I don't really have that much to say about this one that I didn't already say about the other two. The levels are still really obtuse, and I got stuck a few times, mainly because I preferred to look at the walkthrough instead of just clawing at literally every panel on the wall. I also really liked this message, which said that this looks like a challenging jump. In just about any other game, you'd probably think that was a hint that you should look for an alternate way forward, but it isn't, and you shouldn't. You can make the jump very easily, and it's the only way to continue. Like I had mentioned, in the Alien campaign, you're running around breaking everything to find the thing you need to destroy to progress, and in the Human campaign, you're running around interacting with everything to try to find the thing you need to use to progress. In the Predator campaign, they switch it up by having you do both. There are random, nondescript things you need to break, and there are random, nondescript things you need to use. Actually, the Predator campaign generally feels like a weird mishmash of the previous two. When fighting against Marines, you just kind of run at them full speed and dice them up with your wrist blades before they even have a chance to react, much like the Alien. But because you're not nearly as fragile as the Alien, you can do this completely on autopilot, and you heal by consuming your energy, which is super plentiful. You can even just press a button to extinguish yourself on a whim whenever you catch on fire. When you're up against aliens, it's basically the same familiar routine as when you were playing the Marine, except this time your guns are extremely powerful and you can deal with the Horde much more effectively. Because aliens can see you regardless and Marines pose absolutely no threat, your active camo is kind of pointless, despite being one of the most iconic parts of the Predator's toolkit. Thermal vision would similarly be pretty redundant in spite of how evocative it is, if not for how much it helps to reduce the harshness of the game's lighting. The Predator campaign also ends with a fight against the Xenomorph Queen, only this time you actually fight her instead of just ejecting her into space. I guess you're meant to just run around in circles while shooting at her until she dies, but you could alternatively stand in the corner where she can't hit you and just shoot her from there. The game tells me I've retained my honor. Well, if you say so. As for the multiplayer offerings, you have the standard deathmatch modes, but there's also some more interesting ones like co-op, survival, and tag, where one player is either the Predator or the Alien, and everyone else is Marines jockeying to be it. I haven't actually played any of the multiplayer though, so I can't really provide an opinion on it. So what to make of Aliens vs. Predator? I liked dismembering people and aliens. I disliked the relentless onslaught of enemies, and I absolutely hated getting lost all the time. Climbing on walls as the Alien is as cool as it is thematic, but the gameplay otherwise doesn't feel particularly alien-like. You're never stalking and hunting the way that the one in the first movie did, and you're never charging into Marines as a swarm the way that they did in the second movie. Similarly, as the Marine, you're never desperately fighting for survival or working as a member of a squad covering each other's backs. And as the Predator, you never really feel like you're on a hunt. Regardless of species, you're always on your own, and you're always just rushing headlong into your enemies. I said before that I think the best order to play the campaign in is Alien, then Marine, then Predator, just as they're listed in the campaign select menu. That's really only because the gameplay feels the best suited for the Alien, and it's nice to start off on the right foot before shattering the illusion when you switch to Marine or Predator. Every species basically feels the same, and the whole game is extremely frantic in a way that isn't very fun or very thematic. There's just constantly a lot going on very quickly. Alright, time to talk about the movie. Although, honestly, I don't really have that much to say. It's not a good movie, but also isn't particularly bad either. It's mostly just extremely bland and completely forgettable. For a movie called Alien vs. Predator, it's pretty bare on Alien vs. Predator action. Other than the quick throwaway kills, I think it features exactly two fights between aliens and predators. The first is a thoroughly unsatisfying slap fight, and the second is more of an alien versus human situation, with the Predator occasionally helping out. Actually, the movie generally focuses pretty heavily on the humans, but then it also doesn't bother to flesh any of them out or make them anything more than two-dimensional cardboard cutouts. I mean, I guess it tries to.
When I was a kid growing up in Italy, you know what they call a moon that big? La luna del cacciatore.
What's that?
Hunter's moon.
Hunter's moon.
What? The movie also seemed to confuse itself about which character had which personality.
When that door opens, we're dead.
Not if we set things right.
10 seconds later.
We have to consider the possibility that we might not make it out of here.
For example, the movie has a tough-as-nails corporate mercenary guy who seems to be Wayland's right-hand man, but as soon as one of his goons dies, he becomes instantly jaded with Wayland.
I need to know what this man died for.
He died trying to make history.
Whose? Yours?
In a similar vein, the protagonist seems to hate everything that Wayland stands for, and butts heads with him repeatedly over risking people's lives to satisfy his ego. And yet, when he dies, she's completely distraught about it, even though she didn't seem to super mind anybody else dying. There were bits and pieces that I really liked. In one early scene, this guy is setting up his camera to take a selfie, and the movie is dropping loads and loads of formal cues that a jump scare is coming up. For a brief moment at least, I had thought that he would get got and the others would only find his camera and they'd look at the picture he took and see that there was an alien right behind him or something like that. That's not what happens, like, at all, but still, there was a glimmer of what could have been. I also liked the concept of humans willingly allowing themselves to get face-hugged as a religious sacrifice, even though I don't particularly care for what the movie did with that concept. Having the group split into two rooms connected by a long vent was a nice touch, and the movie actually did use that for a payoff when the upper room got face-hugged and the lower room could hear them all panicking, even though they had absolutely no idea what was actually going on up there. And this brief bit where the guy almost gets pancaked is suitably harrowing. I also like the part with the net cutting into people, which they do twice, though the second time isn't so effective because the alien's acid blood dissolves the netting. If you're thinking this looks kind of familiar, you're probably thinking of the famous scene from the 2002 movie adaptation of Resident Evil, which, wouldn't you know it, was also written and directed by Paul W.S. Anderson. The movie has a lot of jarring tonal leaps. Before anything bad has even happened, there's a random cut to this guy running around frantically with his weapon already drawn before getting instantly killed by predators. Later on in the movie, the protagonist goes from rightly terrified by the unstoppable predators to defiantly standing up to them and making demands in a matter of moments. On a similar note, the aliens in this movie reproduce very quickly. In the original Alien film, it takes a while for the facehugger to oviposit, and then it takes a while for the chestburster to gestate, and then it takes a while for the alien to mature. It's not clear exactly how long, but it's implied that the whole process takes a few hours at least, and that time is used by the movie to build tension and foreboding. In this movie, we go from egg to facehugger to chestburster to alien in the span of a couple of minutes, cutting short all of that potential. So what to make of Alien vs. Predator? I have to admit that there's a lot that I liked about it. I think it's easy to draw comparisons to The Thing, which is also about scientific folks in the Antarctic dueling with a deadly alien, but I think this movie is actually much more of an adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness. It's a doomed expedition to the Antarctic. The humans encounter a spacefaring alien race that has exploited a different alien race for centuries. Both alien species attack the humans and each other, and there's a massive lore dump while a learned man reads off hieroglyphs that chronicle the history of the spacefaring aliens. Except that this movie doesn't even have an ounce of the tension that Mountains of Madness is brimming with, and it ends on a bizarrely optimistic note that betrays the entire rest of the movie. If you want to watch absolutely anything that has aliens and/or predators in it, or if you just enjoy Arctic space mysteries like I do apparently, then you'll probably enjoy this movie. I mean, I know I enjoyed watching it once. I can't really imagine ever wanting to watch it again. Aliens vs. Predator is a first-person, mostly shooter, where you'll be playing either a colonial marine, alien, or predator. The game offers a separate campaign as each species, and you can play them in any order, so I just defaulted to the order that they were listed in the menu. Marine, then Alien, then Predator. And once again, I actually think that's the best order to play in. Starting off as the Marine, we're treated to an interesting enough opening cutscene that ends with us predictably taking a box to the face during a rough landing. While we're still in a barely conscious daze, we're apparently carried along as the squad completes their missions to hunt down aliens. And when we finally regain consciousness, we're all alone, and our squad mate Tequila informs us that everybody was separated, so it's up to us to regroup. The very first thing I noticed when playing the Marine is the movement, which is clunky in a very particular way. I can't imagine it's even remotely visible in the video, but there's a tiny delay between when I first press forward and when the character actually starts moving, I guess due to the time that it takes them to actually put their foot forward. Also, this is one of those games where looking left to right is on a much higher sensitivity than looking up and down, and while they do let you change the sensitivity per axis, they aren't normalized, so finding the right balance would take a degree of trial and error that I wasn't really willing to put up with. Long story short, I got the sensitivity close to what I wanted, but it still wasn't perfect. Anyway, right off the bat, this game has much better pacing than the last one. Okay, that's a very low bar to clear, but already this game is doing a good job at establishing atmosphere and using the motion sensor to build tension, which is its whole narrative purpose after all. While we're on the topic of comparing this Marine to the one from 10 years prior, the horrific image intensifier has been completely removed and replaced with a standard shoulder-mounted flashlight, and the flares have been downgraded so severely that they are entirely worthless. You can only throw out one of them, and it's not really all that bright, and it only lasts a couple of seconds before disappearing. Luckily, the flashlight gets the job done. Fighting the aliens feels frantic, but this time it's the good kind. You really feel like you're fighting for your life. Except that when the aliens come up to attack you, you can melee them and beat them back, which feels badass actually, but kinda undercuts the whole struggling to survive thing. You can also block alien attacks with your arms to significantly reduce the damage, which is just cartoonishly bizarre. I found it really easy to lose track of the aliens as I shot at them, causing me to just kind of spray and pray as they stalked around on the walls, and honestly that feels pretty authentic. I feel like the guns could do a little more damage though. In particular, the flamethrower was completely worthless. Aliens take forever to die from the fire, and when they do, they explode for some reason, making the weapon a pretty big liability to use, considering that the time bomb aliens are going to try to melee you the whole time that they're on fire. The flamethrower is also terrible at killing facehuggers, which was the only niche that it filled in the previous game, so I'm not really sure why you'd ever take it, cause this time around you can only carry 2 weapons in addition to your pistol. The shotgun though, This thing blasts away aliens real good. It feels good, sounds great, and it pairs very nicely with the game's dismemberment system. You can blast the tails and the legs clean off the xenomorphs, and that'll restrict their mobility if it doesn't just outright kill them. See, they'll even crawl on the floor towards you as they bleed out. It's great. Where the previous game had a limited number of saves, this one has no manual saving whatsoever, and you're instead reliant on checkpoints throughout the level. Same difference. The end result is that dying means you'll have to tediously replay sections of the game, and death in this game almost always feels completely arbitrary. The levels tend to be very linear this time around, but they're still set up in a competent way. The arenas that you fight in are pretty varied and interesting. It's not like you're just running and gunning down hallways the entire time or anything. On top of that though, the game also gives you objective markers that you can see through walls, an objective indicator above your motion detector that tells you exactly where to go, and voice lines that repeatedly tell you what to do if you take too long to do it.
Move it, rookie. Find the router and hook me up with the refinery.
I kinda wish I could turn this stuff off. I mean, again, the levels are pretty linear, I don't really need the help. Although if I had to choose between this extreme hand-holding and the nightmare mazes of the previous game, I'd take the hand-holding any day of the week. Although the game has a solid intro, I'd say the first couple of levels in the Marine campaign are narratively a little rough. An almost comical pattern emerges immediately where every time you're about to group up with more Marines, you hear them perishing moments before you can arrive.
I'm coming up in the elevator now.
Watch those shadows, rookie. The private will be there soon.
Almost there. Hold up.
once you do find some actual living Marines,
Don't relax just yet, Marines.
they don't last long. And in only the second level, you're already tasked with killing the alien queen, and the fight's kind of boring. From there, though, I'd say the campaign just gets stronger and stronger. The enemies remain solid from beginning to end. In addition to the normal Xenos, you get aliens who specifically stay on walls and other perches so that they can spit acid on you, and later on you come up against Weyland-Yutani military androids who want to gun you down. You also have a couple of run-ins with predators, as you'd expect. The atmosphere is great, the environments are nice, and the levels are very well designed in my opinion, with arenas that feel unique and interesting from beginning to end.
Don't relax just yet, Marine.
The missions tend to be ever so slightly on the long side too, which is a good thing. It makes each one feel like a proper undertaking.
Regroup at the dropship.
Don't relax just yet, Marines.
The story is pretty minimal, but I'd say it's a little more than just serviceable. It's got some good momentum behind it, and the climax does actually feel satisfyingly climactic. The game does an excellent job of making you feel like you're desperately fighting for your survival against alien and corporate forces that have you completely outmatched.
Don't relax just yet.
There's also a fun dynamic going on later on where all you're trying to do is make it off this planet alive, but that puts you at odds with Weyland's purely corporate bottom line motivations. So he does everything that he can to prevent you from surviving. So when he talks to you as you progress closer and closer towards him, he talks like you're on some kind of ideological crusade against him, when in reality you are just trying to live and he isn't having it.
Weyland-Yutani, building better worlds.
One thing that is super weird though is the implied relationship between you and Tequila. I mean, all we know for sure is that we were assigned to the same squad, and I think this is our first assignment given that we're only ever referred to as Rookie. Tequila partakes in what I interpreted as just friendly banter, but because Rookie is a silent protagonist, we can only infer how he feels about her. One of the sticking points for me is the name of achievements related to her rescue, called I'll Never Leave You and That's a Promise. That feels a bit heavy for just squad mates, and combine that with this weird nasty head pat thing that you do when you put her into stasis, and I'm getting creepy het vibes. Now I do know that I'll Never Leave You, That's a Promise comes from Aliens, but even putting aside the fact that that isn't really a well-known or iconic line, and it's not even the actual quote from the movie,
I'm not gonna leave you, Newt. I mean that. That's a promise.
I don't think that drawing a connection between Rookie's relationship to Tequila and Ripley's relationship to Newt makes the former less weird. Anyway, on to the Alien campaign. As you'd expect, you can climb on walls and ceilings, but this time around, your crosshair always points in the direction of gravity, making the whole thing way less disorienting. You can also now jump directly onto surfaces, with the crosshair changing based on whether or not you can jump, and your crosshair also darkens while you're in shadow. This is great! That condenses a ton of useful information down into one little HUD element which would be there anyway. Throughout most of the campaign, you're going solo, though there are a few notable parts where you're charging alongside your Xeno brethren. Marines have enough firepower to absolutely ruin you if you're not careful, making stealth a necessity, and honestly, it feels great. You really get the sense of being a stalking alien picking hapless Marines off one by one. My usual strategy was to hop down behind a lone Marine, kill them, and then hop back up onto the ceiling before anyone could see me. It plays almost like the Batman Arkham games, though it is admittedly simpler and maybe also easier.
Don't relax just yet, Marines.
This time around, androids get a blue outline. In the previous game, they were the only enemies that didn't get highlighted by alien smell-o-vision. The idea was that as synthetics, they don't give off a scent the way that animals do, and they're a threat, but they aren't prey. I felt that was a nice thematic touch, even if it was just kind of a detriment to the gameplay, because you'd be moving so fast that it was kind of hard to notice or keep track of the androids as you encountered them. In this game, now that things are slowed down and combat is almost exclusively a stealthy affair, I think it would have been neat to have an enemy type that didn't get outlined, so you had to rely on the usual visual and audio detection cues to spot and track them. As it is, the androids are basically the same as the Marines, except milky instead of bloody, and they require one more hit if you don't stealth kill them. Also, I think I heard the motion tracker beep once or twice, but I couldn't really tell whether or not it was actually being used by the Marines or the androids while I was playing the alien. I think that would have also been kind of a fun thing to contend with during stealth. Easily the biggest snag while playing the Alien is a relatively minor one, and it's how clumsy it is to enter and exit vents, which is something you'll be doing fairly often. Also, as linear as this game is, I did manage to get stumped, but it was only once, and it was due to a vent that I didn't even notice at first. It's right here. Now you know. As with the Marine campaign, the story here is very minimal, but still quite effective in my opinion. A lot of what you're doing can feel like pretty aimless killing.
Don't relax just yet.
But that also kind of makes sense. You're just a xenomorph, on the prowl defending your hive from the encroaching Marines. I'd say the intro is basically perfect, starting with Weyland-Yutani harvesting you from forcibly impregnated employees, and ending with a power failure that you took advantage of to free your brethren and your queen from the testing facility. And no spoilers, but the ending cutscene is a very satisfying payoff. 2 perfect bookends to a fun alien fantasy. It is a short-lived fantasy, however. The Alien campaign is by far the shortest of the 3 in the game. Not only does it only have 6 missions compared to the other campaigns' 8, but the Alien's movement and gameplay is also easily the fastest of the bunch. I beat the whole Alien campaign in about an hour. I definitely would have liked more, but at least it doesn't overstay its welcome.
Don't relax just yet, Marines.
The Predator gameplay seems to be sort of a mashup of 2 different styles that don't really blend together in my opinion, and I didn't find either of those styles individually all that fun either. Against aliens, it's primarily a sort of melee fighting game, where light attacks interrupt your opponent's heavy attacks break your opponent's block, and blocking your opponent's light attacks leaves them vulnerable. Not only is it kind of awkward to control, not least with follow-through so dramatic that you'll fly up walls to stay locked onto a target that you swung at, but attempting to read aliens' animations to figure out what kind of attack they're doing or whether or not they're blocking isn't really an intuitive or fun thing to have to do all the time. You can use your energy cannon to kill them, but you get a frankly pitiful number of shots before needing to recharge, and there are a hell of a lot more aliens than there are energy sources. Later in the game, you get a laser-guided boomerang disc blade that can theoretically be used to take several of them down at a distance, but aiming and controlling that disc is super awkward, making it almost unusable, which is a shame because on paper it sounds like it should be great. When you go up against the Marines,
Don't relax just yet, Marines.
It turns into what honestly feels like kind of a worse version of the Alien gameplay. Your active camo keeps you nice and sneaky, and you can arbitrarily distract Marines to go to whatever specific point you want them to. So you just kind of super leap around, stealth killing and stabbing them until they're all dead. It's just not as satisfying or evocative as the Alien gameplay, in my opinion. Very late in the game, you get your final weapon, the combi stick, which is basically an infinitely regenerating throwing spear. This weapon is much more my style, and basically became my go-to from then on. It one-shots whatever it hits, and the delay before you get a new one is extremely short. This meant that for the stealth sections, I could basically just sit cloaked in one place and throw spears until everybody was dead, which was honestly a lot more fun than the normal Predator stealth gameplay. The vision modes this time around are simultaneously less jarring and more useful, but sadly they also have a significantly greater impact on the visuals of the environment, which is a real shame because I rather like the environments in the game. Overall, I'd say Predator is easily the weakest campaign out of the 3. Not only is the gameplay nothing special, the story feels like a complete afterthought, serviceable at best. The stealth kill animations are great though. They were also really good for the Alien. All of a sudden, I'm remembering now that the facehugger's design was explicitly made to evoke straight men's fear of oral penetration. Just a random thought.
And I'm not going to go after the women in the audience. I'm going to attack the men. And I'm going to put in every image I can think of that I know will make the men in the audience cross their legs. Homosexual oral rape. Birth. The thing lays its eggs down your throat.
The Predator's kills involve a lot of spine action, like this one where you pull a guy's head off through his chest. A feat which sounds impossible, and yet... I'm also a fan of the one where you pull your victim's head and spine out and then caress it. No, not like that. One thing that's pretty neat about playing through all of the campaigns is that they interconnect and overlap in ways that's kind of fun and narratively satisfying. For example, when you play as the Predator, you learn that ancient predators had captured and entombed an alien queen, which was then unearthed and relocated by Weyland-Yutani, Then as the alien, you free that queen when you break out of the research facility, and then as the Marine, you end up killing that queen, and you can later on find her ovipositor in the Weyland-Yutani facility. Also, the levels themselves are reused in each campaign, which might sound lazy, but it totally works. It helps to underscore how these stories are overlapping, and you end up going through the levels in completely different routes and in a different order in each of the campaigns, and certain areas can only be seen in one campaign or another. And that's all on top of the fact that each species traverses levels quite differently and has very different gameplay, so even the same arena provides a significantly different experience in each of the campaigns. I almost feel like designing areas that work in all three contexts would be more work than just creating new levels, but they pulled it off. Oh yeah, there's also collectibles in each of the campaigns, but I'm not really sure why. For the Predator and Alien, these are just meaningless things you find while exploring, and you can fill a tracker for getting them all. Woohoo! For the Marine, you find audio logs, and you can play them back, but every single one is completely vacuous.
The geologists say those caves below the refinery run deep. Got drunk one night with one of them. He said some of the tunnels there weren't natural. And he didn't mean man-made.
They don't really contribute to the atmosphere or world building, they're just kind of noise. Given that the levels are pretty linear anyway, I don't think this game really ought to have bothered with extra nooks and crannies to hide these away in. It just doesn't really blend with this level design or gameplay. In addition to the single-player campaigns, the game also features a few different multiplayer modes. And while they do have more interesting game modes than Deathmatch, a lot of it does just boil down to aimlessly walking around until you can find someone that you're supposed to kill, which isn't that interesting to me. It also features a cooperative survival game mode where you play as a group of Marines fighting off endless waves of aliens. I think this mode is only alright, and really only the first time you play it. It just felt a little too bare to me. If the maps had some actual objectives on it, or at least let you progress through different areas, and if you could buy upgrades or something throughout the match, something more like Killing Floor or Call of Duty Zombies, I feel like it would have had much more longevity. As it is, it just feels like there isn't really enough meat on the bones. So what to make of Aliens vs. Predator? I kind of feel like this game might have worked better as just an Aliens game, ditching all the Predator content in favor of a Marine campaign that felt more lethal and daunting, and an Alien campaign with more interesting stealth mechanics. But as it is, I still really like it. In some ways, it feels like it's 3 different games merged into one in a way that works very well more often than not. It's definitely rough around the edges. Like, I didn't mention it yet, but you can't crouch. I mean, that's kind of weird, right? Particularly in the firefights against androids. The controls in general were just a bit clunky, particularly for the Alien and the Predator, who have a lot more going on than the Marine does. And while I don't think the Predator gameplay was a winner for me personally, I do have to respect it for trying something different from the other campaigns. One thing that I really like about this game is how playing as the Marine makes you feel outmatched and desperate, and that contrasts very nicely with how playing the Predator, and more so playing the Alien, makes you feel like a scary, stalking menace. The great atmosphere and the distinct gameplay styles make me consider this not only a good Aliens and Predator game, but just a solid game in its own right. And that's kind of a rare accomplishment for licensed games. Well, there we have it. We've seen what the Aliens vs. Predators are offering. So, which is better? I think there's a pretty clear winner here. The arcade game and the most recent game are the two that I enjoyed the most, and I think they stand head and shoulders above the rest. Between the two of them, though, I think it's undeniable that the most recent game is the one that delivers on the promise of what people are going to think of when you tell them about a game called Alien vs. Predator. It makes you feel like an alien when you're playing as the alien, it makes you feel like a predator when you're playing as the predator, and it makes you feel like a marine when you're playing as the marine. None of the other games do that, so it's the clear winner. This game is Alien vs. Predator. So, what should the others be called? Well, if you'll just allow me to be a bit indulgent, I would like to address the names on display here. Not Alien vs. Predator, but Alien and Predator. Look, simple one-word titles are just no good. Alien and Predator are really only evocative now that they're extremely well known in pop culture. Like, if you took Alien, Predator, The Thing, and Prey and swapped their names around completely at random, you'd still always end up with a configuration that works exactly as well as the real names do. These names just suck. As for aliens, alien just with an S tacked on to the end, well, honestly, I have to admire the sheer unsubtle simplicity of it, but it's still a one-word title, so I don't approve. But Alien vs. Predator, that's gold. I mean, again, it only works because everyone knows that Alien refers specifically to these guys, and Predator refers specifically to those guys. But if we take that for granted, Alien vs. Predator is a name that is so honest and so unpretentious that it breaks through the sounds silly barrier and straight into the sounds rad zone. At least, for me it does. So in renaming these games, I'd like to honor that unpretentious honesty. The 1993 beat-em-up is all about methodically clearing out the alien infestation on Orion, and the whole game feels like a chore. So it should have been called AVP, Cleanup on Orion. The 1994 arcade game doesn't fit the theme of Alien vs. Predator to me, at all. I mean, whoever saw the slow-burning, tension-ratcheting horror film Alien and thought of this colorful super wrestling beatdown is clearly a genius, but at the same time, you could replace all of the characters and enemies with basically anything else, and it would probably work better thematically. This should have been called AVP Alien Beatdown. The 1994 Jaguar game is a gargantuan maze masquerading as a shooter. It should have been called AVP The Labyrinth. The 1999 game's name is as obvious as it gets. Alien vs. Marine Feet Predator, Turbo Mode, or AMP Turbo for short. I know we were all thinking that. And finally, the 2004 film should have been called AVP The Temple of Madness. Actually, that sounds like a movie I'd want to see, so it doesn't really deliver on that title, but that's as close as we're gonna get, I think. Alright, that's it. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time for Dirt. Well, technically. I don't know what this guy was thinking. All he needed to do was whip out a second keyboard, type MART, and plug that sucker in. Bam, hacked.